Are you ready for episode 3?
Yeah, stoked.
This one I'm very excited about because I get to do less talking, more listening, and very exciting because the more we've prepared thoughts for this, just like you with me, but you realize how little I actually know about Buddy Powers. Yeah. So what I wanted to do is if you could just give us a quick snapshot before we talk origin story, if you could let the audience know, kind of paint a picture of what you're doing now. What does your operation look like now? What is making money to put food on the table for your family? What are you enjoying about what you're doing? We'll start there and then we'll go back to the beginning.
Yeah, sounds good. So Big Spring, as it is today, is it's our home. It's where my wife and I live. We're in the basement of our house now that we've converted into our lovely podcast studio. And it's also where my in-laws have built a house. My mom has built a house here. My brother's in-laws have built a house on our farm. 2 of our dear friends have built houses here. And so we have sort of this mixture of, in terms of the place itself, a working farm, a home to ourselves, our family, and a few close friends, and an event venue and lodging. Technically, a micro resort is what we were zoned as, which we had to do that. It sounds very grandiose, but we had to do that because we wanted to add lodging to the property. And we were just an event venue, but to transition to that, we had to become a micro resort. So, yeah. So in terms of what we do that makes money, well, we have a cow-calf herd, which basically means mama cows that we breed. They have calves. We either sell or butcher the calves or keep some to grow the herd. We recently sold that, and on the farming side, we custom graze for other farmers, which I might talk more about later. But custom grazing is pretty cool. It's basically where you get paid either by the pound of gain on an animal, or you get paid for the number of days that you have the animal, and there's somebody else's animals. So right now we have a group of 60 steers that are a friend of mine who lives in the county north of us, and basically he owns the steers, but he doesn't have enough pasture to graze them all summer, so he sends them to guys like me who've got land, who know how to graze animals, and we rotationally graze them, and we get paid on the pounds that they gain. So it's a cool way to run stock on your pastures that is really low capital expenditure if you have the land, which we do. So
and low risk.
And low risk, because like unfortunately earlier this year we had a lightning strike, which happens sometimes, right? And it killed 2 of the steers in the night. And obviously sad and unfortunate. It happens in nature, but for me, I'm out the pounds of gain I would be earning from those animals, but I'm not out the, maybe $800 to $1,000 it would have been to buy each of those steers as calves this year. So it's a good low risk way to run livestock. So we do that as well. We also raise pastured poultry, so that's chickens, turkeys, ducks on pasture in the Polyface model. Move them every day. We don't have any on farm right now. We will again next year. And the other 2 things I kind of already mentioned, but we have weddings and events on the farm. That's right now our biggest cash flow. And then we have lodging that we basically like Airbnbs, short-term lodging that we have bought and rehabbed or built on the farm. And we plan to build more of that as well. So it's multifaceted. And then my wife also has an online business that she does in the photography space. So
2 final questions.
Yeah.
How many children do you have, and how many acres does Big Spring cover?
So we have 4 kids. They are all about 2 years apart, or the first 3 are each less than 2 years apart. Yeah. But we call those Scottish twins. Like Irish twins, I think, is less than a year apart.
Right.
My wife is half Scottish. Jill's mom is from Scotland, and so less than 2 years apart we call Scottish twins. Anyway, and so we have a boy is our oldest, who's 6, and then 3 girls. And Big Spring, we we farm about 500 acres and we own about half that much land. So we lease several farms that actually adjoin our farm, and run cattle and make hay on those.
Awesome. Thanks for the snapshot.
Yeah.
Let's go back to the origins. Tell us how a suburbanite lad from Northern Virginia made it to one of the world's foremost regenerative agriculture farms here in Virginia. What was that transition, the setup? Tell us that story. How'd you get going?
Yeah. So I grew up in Northern Virginia in the suburbs. As you said, mentioned before, we grew up like 5 miles from each other, did not know each other. 5 miles in the country, you're neighbors. That's right. Like basically your next door neighbors. 5 miles in Northern Virginia is like, you might as well live
a million neighbors between
you. Exactly. Yeah. It's not the same. Anyway, grew up in the suburbs. I would say, just a little bit about my childhood. I went to a small school small high school in Northern Virginia by their standards. It was about 1,000 kids. It's called Falls Church High School. It's the most diverse high school in Fairfax County, which was the most populated county and diverse county in Virginia. I think it still is today. So anyway, it was a really cool upbringing. So many friends from so many different backgrounds, all through sports and stuff. It was just a melting pot. Northern Virginia is with being so close to DC. There's just so many people from all walks of life and coming into the country and all this stuff. So I loved growing up there. But I also knew, like deep down, that I wanted to move out of that area. And I wanted to every time, like if we went on a road trip and we'd get out into farm country, it just stirred something. I thought, I want to live in the mountains, even as a young kid. So yeah, from growing up in Northern Virginia, went to college at Christopher Newport University and studied philosophy there. And my whole, as a philosophy major there, you have to write a senior thesis. My whole senior thesis was on the theology of sustainable agriculture, because sometime in high school I thought, man, maybe I could be a farmer. I like working with my hands. I know I want to be out in the country. Maybe I could be a farmer. And at that time I heard, like you get paid for not planting corn and stuff from government subsidies.
Land.
Yeah. Thought maybe that's what you do. I don't know what farming is, but yeah, as I started reading Joel Salatin's books, and fast forward, I'm in college. I'm a philosophy major because I wasn't sure what else to do. And I loved thinking about people's worldviews and my own worldview in relation to them. And yeah, landed on, as a Christian, this deep-seated truth of God caring about how we interact with the land, in the same way that He cares about, like our body as a temple, or love your neighbor as yourself. In the same way that He cares about how you look at yourself and how you look at your neighbor and how you love others. I think of Romans 8, I believe it is, where it's, the creation waits in eager expectation for the sons of God to be revealed, so that they can share in the redemption. And that's because we as believers are those people that can move for good in the world, even in the created world, and are called to, I should say, we're called to move, to be agents of that redemption. So when I started looking at thinking about that whole concept, and then I knew I loved farming, but didn't know at all really what farming was, what it really looked like. And I started learning about, like, wow, farming is the number one way that humans impact the world. Like the number one negative impact that we have on the world is from agriculture right now. It's the number one use of pharmaceuticals, number one use of fossil fuels, all these different things that made me think, wow, I wonder if there's another way to farm. And so that's how I came across sustainable agriculture, which is now known, I think, more popularly as regenerative agriculture. And this was in college. My mom called me up, actually. She was in her book group at home in Northern Virginia, and she's like, buddy, I'm reading this book in book group called Omnivore's Dilemma, and there's this farm in it. called Polyface, and I think that they are just what you're looking for. And so I pick up a copy of Omnivore's Dilemma. I read that, and I'm hooked. I'm like, yes, this is the farming I want to do. This sustainable farming that actually builds up topsoil, that uses very little fossil fuels, that's locally based, that honors and respects the natural tendency of an animal. In other words, like the cattle are raised in the pastures versus in a feedlot. The chicken are raised out in a field eating bugs and grass and grain, not in a chicken house cooped up. I loved all those ideas. Are very romantic, and I dove into that. So wrote my senior thesis on the theology of sustainable agriculture and why, as a Christian, we ought to care about where our food comes from. And then from there, I applied for an internship at Polyface Farm, which I think is what you were referencing. I think they are probably one of the foremost sustainable livestock farms in the world. I mean, the founder, Joel Salatin's, he's got TED Talks. He's got all these books. He's very prolific and outspoken in a great way for that whole world of farming. So yeah, I called up Polyface back in college. I think it was probably my junior year.
Cold call.
Yeah, just called him. Just found their number online or something and called him. And I didn't know it at the time, but Joel answered the phone, and him and I had a conversation and told me, yeah, this is the process for coming to work with us. You can come be an intern for a summer and kind of learn the ropes. And it's a free program. We only give you a stipend, but you don't have to pay to learn from us or anything. And anyway, I got that internship. There's an interview process and all this stuff, but I got that internship. So I graduated college and then went and worked at Polyface Farm.
That's awesome. So just to rewind, when you said you didn't know it at the time, you didn't know that Joel rarely picked up the phone.
Oh yeah, I don't think you're gonna get Joel on the horn nowadays. They had blown up a good bit because of Omnivore's Dilemma. That book was like a New York Times bestseller, and I think really put them on the map to a larger audience. They were pretty big with like the homeschool crowd and had a great local market share. They're in Western Virginia, actually just north of where we are right now in Swope. But Omnivore's Dilemma really put them on the map. And then Joel and the whole Polyface team has done a great job of just continuing to be ambassadors to spread the word of this style of farming. And there are, I should say too, lots of guys that are farming this way.
Not just Joel.
One of the most notable. Yeah.
So what's interesting is you hadn't touched a tractor, put your hands in the dirt, and so you have this romantic idea and these more philosophical ideas of your engagement with the land.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And Polyface
very
is your
idealized.
So it's your first real experience farming, doing that what you had dreamed about doing. Is your life's calling is to farm. Can you describe what that experience was like? It's a very intense internship from my understanding.
Yeah, yeah.
Describe what that was like and what your thought process was like. Did you embrace it, hate it? You know, what was it like for you?
I mean, I loved the internship. We had I think there were 8 interns that summer, and it was a great group of interns. So great people that were there that summer, and guys that were really accomplished. One of the guys was a Marine who went to the Naval Academy, had done a couple tours. He was older than most of us, and really wanted to get into, really cared about health, wanted to learn a lot more about farming. And he's a doctor now, actually, because of like all of his journey through learning how to take care of himself, through learning how to farm at Polyface. Anyway, it was a really cool team that summer. I loved it. It is intense in that you go from college life, which is my experience of the academia was not physically taxing, obviously. So yeah, to go to Polyface, it was pretty intense. You're up every day super early. You're working usually 7 days a week. We'd stagger for the interns' weekends off. And Sundays is always a slow day at Polyface, just church and bare minimum chores, but I loved it. The whole lifestyle really appealed to me, and there's a great that summer there was a really great camaraderie between the whole team at Polyface, which was really fun. I enjoyed that, the lightheartedness, the really hard work mixed with silly jokes and lightheartedness, and doing something meaningful. It was crazy that, like, at Polyface, there would be people that would come through, like the lead singer to, gosh, I'm going to blank. I don't know the guy's name, but Train. That's it. Train. The lead singer to that band.
Came to Polyface.
Stuff like that. Like famous people would come through. Like Train came the day we were butchering chickens, and that guy, him and his bandmates or whatever. And I remember like talking to him and, joking about how he should do the internship. And every day there'd be, people coming up the driveway just to see the farm, because it's open for tours, self-guided tours, and there's formal tours as well. So it's a high energy place. There's just always stuff going on. There's people working everywhere. There's people coming to see it happen. It was really encouraging. Now, I will say that after my internship at Polyface, I became a contract farmer for them, which that basically means Polyface owns a big farm, and then they rent many farms. And on some of those rented farms, they hire managers to run their cattle on the farm. And then they offer like, hey, you can do complementary enterprises to our cattle on pasture. So that's when I started raising my own chickens, turkeys, and ducks. So after the internship, I did the contract farming thing with Polyface. And when I went to contract farming, totally different than at Polyface. Nobody's coming up the driveway to see you unless it's Joel or one of the Polyface crew to, come check on you. Yeah. And there's nobody helping. It's just you out there. So let me, I guess, back up a little bit. So I met my wife, Jill, in college, as you know. And because I'm starting with the rental farming, Jill and I were married by then.
Okay.
And an important part to, I think, my whole story is that, or our whole story is that Jill was 2 years older than me. So when she graduated, she worked for this marketing firm, and I was still in college. And then I went to Polyface right after college to do the internship while she's still doing the marketing firm job. And, it's in a city, and she would drive out to Polyface and every weekend she could to come see me. And it was really fun. But the big takeaway from that time that was totally God's providence was Jill and I, we loved each other. I mean, we were very conservative about it, but we knew we were going to get married. We didn't talk very openly about that, but I
both
certainly,
thinking it.
Yeah, at a certain point, I definitely knew. And that said, our biggest tension was Jill had like the polar opposite deep down feeling in her heart about where she wanted to be. She wanted to be in a city. She was like, I'm moving to Nashville or New York City or whatever. Right. I'm going to do marketing stuff. I'm going to do that whole thing. And I was like, oh no, I'm going to be a farmer. And she's like, what do you mean? You grew up in like DC. You don't know about farming.
And she didn't have a farming background. Did she?
Yeah, she didn't have farming. She grew up in the suburbs in Northern Virginia too. But yeah, so I think she rightfully thought I was kind of crazy for dreaming this. And then as I'm doing the internship at Polyface, and she's coming out to visit me after a few years doing the marketing, corporate, different city every week for these live events she would put on for this marketing firm, she had kind of had enough. Like God slowly worked on her heart to, every time she'd come out to the mountains to visit me, she'd be like, I just want to stay here. I don't want to have to, I don't want to have to go back to my corporate job and catch that plane to, California tomorrow or whatever. So that was really sweet. And that led to, when we started rental farming, that was the spring that we started rental farming was the spring that Jill and I got married.
Can I stop you right there just to go back to the Polyface internship? You hadn't farmed before. You go to Polyface. You were affirmed in this ideal that you had thought about? What was your thought process like towards farming? You wanted to make this profession?
Yeah, I thought so as I started looking at agriculture and thinking in college and thinking, how could I be a farmer? I started looking at conventional ag, and no bad against conventional ag, but as a guy who didn't have any of that background, no family farm to start on or anything, I'm thinking, how am I going to buy a farm, buy a tractor, or buy all this livestock? Like it was financially a huge lift and something I was zero capability financially of doing.
Right.
So then going to Polyface was cool because, for better or for worse, most of their style of agriculture is based on manual labor, on hard work,
Human power.
yeah, manpower.
farming, yeah.
You do use tractors; they have tractors, but that's not the centerpiece of the farm. The centerpiece of the farm, really, I would say, is great marketing and great production, and those two really go hand in hand, and are, I think, what make Polyface work so well. So seeing, okay, wait, I could just buy 1,000 baby chicks and feed for them and get started. I don't need a huge tractor. I don't need hundreds of thousands of dollars to build a barn or a building, to keep all these animals in. I could rotationally graze them on pasture. This could work. And I loved being outside and working with my hands and the long days, especially when that was like 15 years ago, I guess.
Right.
So
As a younger man.
yeah, young man, I was like, give me more.
Right.
So that's why when the opportunity for the rental farming gig came up, I was like, oh, it was a dream come true.
Can you re-describe the contract farms? You and Jill step into this role. Everything's riding on your ability to steward the land. You need to be profitable, and you're selling a set product back to Polyface you're selling it under Polyface banner.
Yeah. So the way it worked at the time, I know it could be different now, but the way it worked at the time was we had an annual contract with them where we raised their cows on a per day rate that they would pay me for managing their herd while it was at our farm. And then I raised, I think it was 5,000 or 6,000 meat chickens for them the first year. We had 500 egg layers. There were maybe, this might have been later, I guess this wasn't the first year, but we'd raised, a couple hundred turkeys. We'd raise a couple hundred hogs, and Polyface would install all the infrastructure on the farm. And we would, in terms of like the water for the cattle, the fencing for the cattle, they provided all that. But then all the poultry stuff, I would provide. I'd buy the chicks, I'd build the shelters that we raised them in. Yeah, I'd pay for the feed. So it was an interesting mixture of like you had a little safety net of the contract with the cattle, and then it was very entrepreneurial with, it was entrepreneurial in the sense that I didn't have to worry about marketing, but I could really figure out the production side of things. And kind of like I was saying before, the thing about working at Polyface is there's this huge team, whereas I went from this huge team producing, I think we probably raised like 8,000 or 10,000 chickens at Polyface that summer to, maybe I can't remember now, but something like that, to like raising 6,000 chickens totally by myself the next summer. So it was a steep learning curve. And, I had anywhere from like 150 to maybe 200 or so head of cattle. So yeah, it was a steep learning curve. And I would say a lot of the romanticism fell off, and it was like, okay, this is the reality of farming. Yeah, I went from like the big show of Polyface, which I don't mean that in a bad way, but just like
the best case farming situation.
Just all this energy and fun to like, wow, okay, so can you hack it like they did when they got started totally by yourself out here? And we did the rental farming thing for 3 years, I believe.
Can you take us through that first? So Jill's transitioning from marketing to farm life. You're transitioning from Polyface to being on your own. describe the financial situation you were in and what those first months were like?
Oh man,
as you've previously talked about.
Oh, that's a great question. Jill and I had forgotten about this until we were recently remembering that season of life. But so Jill left the marketing job after we got married, moved to the farm with me, and Jill had started shooting friends' weddings and coworkers' engagement sessions and weddings after college while she was working, just as sort of like a side hobby, side fun job. And the plan was she was going to start shooting weddings, or she was going to just shoot weddings and help me with the farm. So I think that first year we were hoping Jill would shoot 12 weddings. And I want to say it was like, $1,000 a wedding, shoot 12 weddings. We'll have an extra 12 grand. Like, that'll get us through the winter. And it was, we were just remembering the other day, it was pretty dire starting the farm. We had a little nest egg. I can't remember how much, maybe $20,000 or so that we'd, that I'd saved up. And she kind of, once we got married, pooled our post-college resources and put all of that into starting the farm, which again, for us with the rental farming side of things meant buying chicks, building a brooder for them to be raised in as baby chicks, building shelters for them to go from baby chicks to out on pasture, and buying all the feed for that. So there's a decent amount of cash that you need to have, depending on the scale to which you're doing that, to create that runway. And the thing that Jill and I remembered recently was we came back from our honeymoon, and at your wedding, some people give you, $100 or a check or whatever. We got back and literally there was nothing left in a checking account, maybe a few $100s. And we had a feed bill due for, I don't remember, several $1,000s. We put all of the money from our wedding, probably $2,000 that we had been given into paying for feed for the chicks, knowing that we had guaranteed sales because we were going to butcher those chicks, and we had a guaranteed contract with Polyface for them to buy the chickens from us. But it was just threadbare. We just made it through that first year, and Jill did shoot a few weddings that first year, and we kind of just made it. Yeah. So, and I think also farming by ourselves, and still very much on the beginner end of things, but with this great deal of responsibility, I could give you so many comical stories about those days that were just like one time. I don't know if I've ever told you about this. It was really hard to leave the farm because we had all these animals. There always seemed to be something that was
leave, not permanently, go on vacation or slip away for the weekend or something.
Yeah. We never went away for the weekend. That was impossible. It was hard for both of us to literally physically be gone from the farm for more than like an hour or so, just because never knew what might, cows might get out, or, the water line might break, to the chickens or whatever. There was always some little thing. And I remember one day we had done all this extra work to get super organized, and we showered. It was probably like a Saturday afternoon. We're like, we're going to go to town and go grocery shopping together, and, maybe get us an early dinner and then come back to the farm and knock out some nice evening chores. So I'm all in my town clothes as and you farmers out there know you've got them. But, my nice, not dirty clothes. We're all showered. We're driving down. At the time, the farm that we rented had this, like, probably half-mile long driveway, long, straight gravel driveway. And it's this beautiful afternoon. We're going out the driveway, and we see these storm clouds to the west. We're like, oh, man, big thunderstorm's coming in. And sure enough, we also see about 200 cattle running down the hill where they're not supposed to be, away from this storm, breaking through a fence, breaking through another fence, and they're on a beeline to the same entrance exit point onto the main road that we are heading, tangentially down the driveway. So we're like, I'm like, oh my gosh, Jill, punch it.
And these are your cattle.
And these are our cows. Yeah. They've flown they're trying to fly the coop.
Yeah.
I'm like, floor it, Jill. And so she takes off, tearing down the driveway. I jump out of the car. And there's this creek that runs parallel to the driveway. We head them off at the creek right before the entrance to the farm, where they could have escaped and gone anywhere on the main road. And I run out into the creek in my town clothes to stop them. And I'm like, at this point now, the storm is coming. And I yell back up to Jill, who's back on the driveway. I'm like, hey, go get my pickup truck. It's got all the fencing stuff in it. We'll run them back up to where they're supposed to be. And I've just got them. They're all fired up because when cattle start to run like that, they're herd animals and there's a lot of energy. So you got to calm them down and get them, to stop them. So I stop them. She goes and gets all the fencing stuff. We start pushing them back to where they're supposed to be and repairing fences. And of course, this storm blows in. We're both still in our nice quote town clothes. Now it's pouring rain. And we're trying to shout to each other over the wind and the thunder and the rain. I'm like, open that gate. And she's like, I can't hear you. And there were just so many times like that where we thought we had things figured out and, the farm threw us a curveball. So that whole season of life, I would say, was a lot of work, a lot of fun, to be honest. I mean, stuff like that in the moment was stressful, but we laughed about it, we laughed about it after. And yeah, it was a really good time. We often talk about that time as like we lived like paupers, but we ate like kings because we had all of this fresh food from our farm. We had a great little garden and we knew lots of other farmers. So we'd kind of share between, somebody might have a bunch of apple trees and we'd all go like make cider together in the fall. There was lots of fun stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. When you consider that experience and how important it is in your story, is there one particular experience from that season that you'd want to share?
I think the craziest one is that was entrepreneurially, it's a weird word, but in terms of just doing this as a business, this was a breaking point, and the way we ended up making it through it was interesting. So we had this, let's see, what year? I think it was 2012, I want to say, 2011. It was the same summer of your sandstorm story. That same storm blew through Virginia.
Global phenomenon.
Yeah, global phenomenon, apparently. But yeah, it was July, just like in Afghanistan. And yeah, but it was in Virginia. And we had this storm blow through called a derecho, which basically was these sideways winds. They weren't predicted, came up out of nowhere, and wreaked havoc all over our part of Virginia. This is a couple years into rental farming. Jill was gone shooting a wedding. It was a weekend, so she was off the farm. I was there, and we had two great friends, Josh and Mandy Poe, coming to visit us. They had just got married, and they didn't have jobs or a house yet, so they were kind of just couch surfing to all their friends' houses. So they'd come out to the farm with the goal of them kind of learning the ropes for a few days and then giving Jill and I a day off where we could go off the farm for a whole day and maybe even spend the night somewhere if they felt really confident that Josh and Mandy felt like they could handle it. So anyway, Jill's gone. Josh and Mandy are there. I'm so excited, and we decide to go into town for dinner that evening. So we go into town, have a great meal, and our farm, well, really, the town of Stanton, which is where that farm was closest to, is down in a bowl, so topographically. So it's kind of protected from storms. So while we were at dinner, we noticed, wow, it's really windy out there. We saw it was like a movie. We saw like a stroller roll by and like some trash cans, empty stroller. And we're like, whoa, wow, that's crazy. And we have dinner. We don't think that much of it. And we start driving back out to the farm. And we couldn't get back to the farm because there were so many trees down. And I didn't have the saw in the truck. So we have to take this circuitous way back to the property. We get back to our place, And I'm like, hey, we gotta drive around and check on all the animals. And so we go up to the broiler field, which is where the meat chickens are.
Is the storm still raging at this point, or is things calmed down?
No, yeah, good question. It blew through in, maybe a half an hour. It wasn't that long. Mm-hmm. So it just seemed like when we were out at dinner, it seemed like a little summer thunderstorm kind of thing. Not that bad. Well, as we start to drive home, we realize it's worse than we thought. And we go up to check on the chickens in my truck, and we had 2,000 chickens on pasture at the time. And we turn out into this field where all the chickens are supposed to be, and the headlights turn out over this field, and there's nothing there. There's not one chicken, one shelter, and the shelters are 12 foot long by 10 foot wide by 2 foot tall, wood and metal and chicken wire. They're heavy. They weigh several hundred pounds. All of it's gone. Not a trace of any of it. And at that point in time, I could have started probably crying, but instead I started laughing like, oh my gosh, guys, this is very bad. And my buddy Josh is like, why are you laughing? Like, I can only laugh or cry right now because I'm in major trouble right now.
A disaster.
Yeah. So what Farmageddon developed into was this huge derecho storm that knocked out power for 3 days. And this was in July. So it was almost 100 degrees for the 3 days after the storm. We did find those chickens. They were blown into the next field. And so the entire next morning was spent finding those chickens, piecing back together parts of the chicken shelters, the wooden metal sheets that we could find. And we built what we called Fort Chicken, which was, because it was so hot, these animals needed shade. So we just were building this big shade structure of all the pieces of the shelters and grabbing chickens by the armful. And because chickens aren't that smart. They don't know to walk all the way up the hill to the shade. So you got to carry them there.
Right.
So we're grabbing these chickens by the armful. Poor Josh and Mandy were sweating. It was crazy. We saved almost all of the chickens, which was unbelievable. And those were, again, going back to what I was saying before, like we fully had cash flowed those. So that was that farming was our main income for the first 3 years of Jill's and my marriage. So the farm's just barely hanging on. And at this point, because we're a few years into rental farming, we had upped our production. And we also had these things called egg mobiles. They're 2 hay wagon chassis with hen houses built on top of them that house about 500 egg layers between the 2 hen houses. And they get moved around each day or every other day to a new spot on the farm so that those hens can rotationally graze, and then you collect the eggs every day. Well, drove out to check on the egg mobiles, and they were parked on a hillside so that they were, their roof line was leaning downhill. The derecho had picked them up and flipped them uphill, and they landed on their roof. So they must have gone, I don't know how high in the air. And I will say, of the egg layers, the egg laying chickens, they are a lot lighter and have more feathers than the meat chickens. We lost half of them, and I don't mean that they died. I mean, literally, we just never saw them again. Like, they probably got blown into the next county. Yeah. They were just gone. So the whole farm is hanging by a thread. We barely save our meat chickens. The cows we pushed down into the creek so they could have water, because the whole farm operates off a well. So when you lose power, you lose your well pump. You don't have water anywhere. The house didn't have water. It was so dire. So Josh and Mandy, God bless them, went from that maybe having this fun like farm getaway,
farm stay,
farm stay where they learn how to farm, and then they watch the farm themselves for a night, to like, we're sweaty all day, covered in manure, and
critical of saving the farm,
critically working every ounce of energy to save the farm, only to come home at night to no power, no shower, no toilets. It was just, it was so crazy. But
are you still friends with them?
Oh, they're amazing. We all laugh about it now, and and as we did a little bit then, but it was just so extreme. But yeah, that I would say of all the things, that's just a very extreme example of how all in we were with farming, and how when you farm, it's if anybody has a pet or kids, it's like it's not the same, but it takes constant attention and thought and care. And when you have something like a natural disaster, essentially like this derecho, it takes friends to help you make it through. And we luckily had our friends visiting. We also, I should say, Polyface, that's when it was great to be part of their network, because they came out, they sent a few people our way. They repaired the egg mobiles and flipped them back over. I didn't have to do any of that because I was already exhausted and spread thin, just trying to keep everything else alive. So, the community part there was awesome. And there's more parts of that story that are, I don't know, crazy and funny. But the point is, we did survive through that. And the farm actually, we farmed again the next year. And that last year we farmed on contract with Polyface. We were at the time, and I think maybe still to this day, the largest contract producer they had in terms of chickens, turkeys, ducks production. Yeah. So it was really fun. And it was such a gift to have that period of time to know, okay, I, as one man with a little bit of help, especially in emergency, a lot of help, but mostly one guy, I can raise a lot of food for people. So if I could figure out the marketing side, and we had sort of been dabbling in that, then man, I could really grow this thing into my own direct market farm. So that was kind of where the dream was heading.
That's such a great encouragement to a lot of people to hear that story. Can you tell us, as we think about how you responded to that was one of many challenges that you encountered. What was your response kind of by nature? What's your nature? And we kind of talked about this before the podcast, and how has that contributed to where you are today? If that question makes sense. Yeah,
I think one thing is, I think with the response to like Farmageddon was just putting one foot in front of the other. I think that whole season of farming by ourselves on contract with Polyface was like a day to day, just I'm going to wake up and put one foot in front of the other, one foot in front of the other. Okay, a derecho happens. We're going to get up at 5 and just figure out how to keep these chickens alive. And a lot of in the moment decisions, but not, to be honest, I didn't have the time to like zoom out very much and take a big picture look at things. So it was a lot of, and I think it serves anybody well in those scenarios to just stay in the moment, stay present. And it taught me the merits of that.
The merits of the grind.
Yeah.
If I were young farmer or a Polyface intern where you were 10, 12 years ago, what advice would you share with them, given the experience of contract farming, given you walked through the romanticized piece of farming, you've walked through the realistic sides, looking 10 years back, what would you want to share with those individuals in that same time of life?
I don't know. Polyface has changed up how they do things. I think they still have rental farm managers. I'm pretty sure I know they still do at some of their farms. And I know their internship program is slightly different now. I will say that I think it was one of the great experiences of my life that formed me into who I am, opened me up to a whole new world of possibilities, that I could really do this agriculture thing. And so I would say to them, to dive in, and certainly what I did was just not overthink it and pursue trying to concisely say this. I think I had all these big dreams, but as the reality of the work came in, it was like I had to just grind out through all these
Task by
chores,
task,
all these tasks, all this responsibility of keeping all this stuff alive and doing it well, and really learning on the fly and struggling to do it well at times. So yeah, I think that if you're doing the internship or you're thinking about learning about agriculture, dive in. Don't wait. I'm glad I did it when I did. It would be near impossible to have that same experience now with 4 kids and a wife and all the responsibilities of life. It was such a gift to take a whole summer and just give it a try. So if Polyface, I know they still have some kind of intern program, and there are other farms that do these kinds of things. If you're thinking about agriculture, it's such a great way. Just
full immersion.
Yeah, just go start working for a farmer. Go say, hey, can I help you out for free in the evenings after work or on weekends? Or can I put up hay with you? You don't have to pay me. I just want to kind of get a feel for this. I think it's something with Polyface. I think with a lot of intern programs in general is there's this, the interns, this happens at big corporations too. Like, they get all the grunt work or they get overworked and these guys are taking advantage of that. I think that there's some merit to that, but there's not much because they're also dealing with people it's not just Polyface, if you had interns at the bakery, you'd be dealing with people that know nothing, presumably, about baking, or certainly they don't know anything about your system of baking. And so what they lack in experience, they need to have in effort.
Right.
And I thought a very fair exchange. My experience of it was just such a blessing, and we'll forever be grateful to those guys. Still have a good relationship with Salatins and with all the Polyface crew. They're good friends.
So you have a profitable contract farm, and you do that for several years. Can you talk to us about the pivot that you and Jill made from the contract farm to the Big Spring farm? What changed? How did it happen? Because what you're doing right now is way different than the contract farm in many respects. So can you talk us through that?
Yeah.
That change.
So to back up a little bit, after I did the internship at Polyface, Jill and I got married at our first farm that was one of Polyface's rental farms that we were becoming the managers of. So we got married at a church right up the road from it and had our reception in the backyard of our farmhouse. And that, along with Jill's experience in the wedding industry, shooting weddings at different places, gave us this dream of like, oh man, it'd be fun to have a wedding venue at the farm someday. And we even kind of thought, not for long, but just gave it a little thought to, I wonder if we could turn this rental farm into a wedding venue. So that was just in the back of our minds. And then going into the rental farming thing, we really enjoyed it. It was a blessing for that season. But we knew, as I was kind of starting to say, that we wanted to try doing our own marketing and having totally our own farm business after 3 years of rental farming. And also during those 3 years, Jill's photography business went from 12 weddings a year to 3 times that many, and she's traveling all over, and they're much bigger budgets, and just it was a huge launch for her. So she's now killing it as this wedding photographer. She's gone every weekend shooting. She's seeing all these different venues and all these different places. And then I actually started shooting with her that last year of the rental farm, contract farming business. So I was gone with her. We would pay a guy to do chores for us because it was better for me to go with Jill and shoot weddings and have a guy look after the farm for us for, a day and then I'd pick up the next morning. So we were wanting to start out on our own. We knew we needed to go find our own farm. And at the time, Polyface didn't have as strong of a market south of their location. So we started looking down in Lexington, where we are now, and even down in Roanoke, just trying to find a farm we could rent or really any opportunity. And we with Big Spring, we actually ended up on, my brother was on a prayer email chain with the previous owners of Big Spring Farm. They had bought it to turn it into a camp for kids with special needs. And the previous owners, Norman, Georgia, are some of the sweetest people. They're Marlene quality. They're just, anyone who knows them, you feel like you've met somebody special when you talk to Georgia and Norm. So Norm and Georgia had bought Big Spring to turn it into this camp. And Norm has been a developer for 30 plus years, huge projects, very complex stuff. So something like a summer camp should be an easy layup for him. So in other words, the summer camp didn't end up working out, and it wasn't because of lack of knowledge or logistics. If you ask Norm and Georgia, remember the first time they said it to me, it just hit me right in the chest. They said, God clearly just had other plans for Big Spring. And so anyway, we get connected with them through this prayer email chain because the camp that they envisioned starting here was not going to happen. And they had a list of ideas for what Big Spring could be. And number one on the list was, we'd love to find a young couple to turn this place into a working farm. And so that's how we first came to visit this place, was seeing if, hey, maybe we could farm down here.
Because they were actively looking to sell it at the time.
Yeah, they had the farm on the market, and they'd sent out this prayer email just kind of canvassing a bunch of friends of, hey, here's some dreams we have for the property. Does anybody have any connections here? And so again, my brother connected us so that we could come down, and we decided to come down and check out the farm. And it's only about 20 minutes or maybe 30 minutes from where we were living to drive down here. So we go through the place, we see the fields, and I'm like, wow, we could make this work. This is grazable land here. There's a beautiful barn that Norman, Georgia had done a bunch of work to restore. That's gorgeous. And immediately Jill and I don't know if we talked about it right away, but we were thinking in the back of our heads, this would be a really cool venue. The barn's right on the edge of this 10-acre lake that's created by Big Spring, which is one of the largest natural springs in Virginia. So it just is this unique lake, barn, mountains, pastures. It's just a very beautiful setting that's striking the first time you see it. And then we went through the farmhouse, which Norman, Georgia had extensively restored, and just all unbelievably beautiful. And so we're going through the house, and we're getting towards the end of our time. And what I remember thinking was, with every rental farm we had before this, there was always a catch. And we were talking to Norman, Georgia about leasing the farm from them. And with other farms, the catch might be the owners, it's been in their family forever, so they don't want a lot of stuff to change. So you can't go taking down this fence, and you can't go moving, that waterer that the cows have drank that water for 100 years or whatever. So there's those things, or it could be cost, or it could be whatever. There's always some sort of like, this is the sticking point that they really want you to cover for them. And my assumption going through Big Spring was that this was just going to be way out of our...
There's got to be something.
Yeah, there's going to be something. And these people are awesome, and this place is so beautiful, but it's going to be... I assumed it was going to be too expensive. They were going to want an arm and a leg for this because they know how awesome and beautiful this place is. And so we were in our kitchen upstairs, and Norm... we're kind of wrapping up, and Norm said to us very honestly, it could sound maybe cliche or something, but he said to us really honestly, he's probably in his early 60s at the time. He said, buddy, Georgia and I feel blessed to have Big Spring and to have been able to do the work that we've done here. We've had a lot of really fun projects in our life, and God's entrusted us with a lot of things, but as we're getting older, are committed to seeing all the things he's entrusted us with have kingdom purpose. And I think he said something like, we want to die broke. We know our kids will be taken care of, and we want to see everything else we have be given to, and they're Christians, so they're saying, given to having a bigger purpose, a purpose for God's kingdom. And that's kind of where we left it. Norm said, so if that's something you and Jill think you could step into, then God's will is the same for us as it is for you. Let's pray about it. And you could send us a proposal, or we'll keep in contact. And I remember leaving feeling, one, just so warm. They're just such wonderful people. I always leave spending time with them. We just saw them about a month ago. Just feeling uplifted because they're so sweet. And then also feeling like this weight of, whoa, wait a minute. I need to zoom out. Like, what? I know the kingdom purpose from my sustainable theology of sustainable agriculture days, but I've spent like years putting one foot in front of the other, just getting through each day farming. And now this guy is saying, hey, what matters most to us is your bigger vision for this property. And that was heavy, and not in like a I can't do it way. It was like a wow, this is, I'm going to step into this. Is what I felt. And this is scary, because we've never thought like that before. So I think probably the biggest gift Norman, Georgia gave us was opening the door or holding that space for, hey, would you step into having a big vision for this place? So a few months later, or maybe not a few weeks later, we sent them our formal proposal for the property. And our vision was to move our working farm there, turn the barn into a wedding and event space. We thought we'd do just a handful of weddings a year, and go from there. And we said, hey, we need a couple of years to lease the farm from you. And they proposed a very fair rate, or I would say not even fair to them rate, to be honest, a below market rate that gave us the financial runway to pour the resources we had into moving the farm here and starting the venue. So I'd say that's probably the other big gift they gave us, was like, look, we're willing to not sell this place for 2 years, give you a very, very low rent for what this place is, and see if you can make it work. And by the grace of God, we did it. I think it was 7 weddings the first year we moved here, raised maybe 2,000 chickens, not much. No cattle that first year or anything. Jill's photography business was still in full swing. She's traveling all over shooting weddings. I'm going with her to almost all of them. And then the next year, the event business more than doubled, probably almost tripled. And from there it was like, well, by the end of those 2 years, we thought, wow, we can actually make this work long term. So we negotiated and bought the farm from them.
What a gift from them.
Yeah.
And it sets us up nicely for the second part of your story and talking more what the current operation looks like here at Big Spring. Considering what you've talked about, there's been a lot of amazing opportunities that you've had with transitioning from Polyface, from college to Polyface to contract farming to the Big Spring. As we think about your entrepreneurial journey, can you leave the entrepreneurial listeners with any particular thoughts as you consider where you came from, where you are now, as we move into the next episode about your story?
Yeah, I have a few thoughts of just things that, hindsight's 20/20. I don't think I knew that some of these things were working at the time, but I see now, wow, that was providential that we approached things that way. So one thing I will say is, when Jill and I were first married, that's such a powerful time. So if anybody out there is married and thinking about making a start of a business, I think when you're single, or when you're married, when you have a partner in this thing, in life and in the business, there's so much room to be dynamic. You have way less limitations. You know, but by the time you've got where we're at now with 4 kids and everything else going on, there's a lot there. And not saying you can't start, a different thought for those folks. But so if you're in that place, I mean, I would say, I think you said a couple episodes ago, don't hesitate. Give it a shot. You know, what's the worst that could happen? Certainly for Jill and I, that worked really well. We were just open to, when we first got married, like, Jill, don't get a job in town. Try doing photography full time, which she had yet to do. And then that business grew to a point where at first farming was our biggest income. Then Jill's photography way exceeded that. And then when the opportunity for Big Spring came, it was like swinging from vine to vine. It was like, okay, we have this photography thing now. We don't need to worry about, the farm can do nothing for a year, or hopefully it doesn't, right? But the farm could make nothing for a year, and we can still make this all work. We can still make life happen. We can still move to this farm and just try. So I would say definitely don't hesitate, go for it. I would say secondly, something that really works well. Well, I guess I have a third one now too. I have 3 things.
Go for it.
The second thing, I just thought of a third one. The second thing I was going to say is the kind of the analogy of like, it's okay to play checkers. You don't, I think a lot of people think I'm going to start this business, so I got to be super strategic, and and it's like, you're playing chess, man. You don't even
we're not there yet.
Yeah, you're not there yet.
Yeah.
Just move one forward. Don't think about, how we're going to position. And not to say you don't want to think about those things at all, but don't let those things keep you from making that first step. And then the last thing I was going to say, just thinking about back to Farmageddon and where we are today, God's brought people into our life, friends, employees that are clearly, that we've had to have in those times. Like at Farmageddon, we had Josh and Mandy. We had our friends Michael and Caitlin actually came out during that time too. Michael and Caitlin helped us launch the wedding venue. They're big in the photography world. The venue never would have been where it was if they didn't help us launch it the way they did. People would ask Michael and Caitlin, "Oh, so when did you guys become business partners with Buddy and Jill?" Yeah. Just because they shared so much about it, and they're like, "Oh no, we're just friends. We just love what they're doing and want to help support them." So I know starting farming, it was just Jill and I, and it was a real slog. And then as we were able to bring more people in, friends, and then employees and otherwise, it's been such a way for all of the vision of it to grow exponentially. Just like going back to what I was saying about being married. If you're single, that's okay. Like you've got even more freedom, right, to make daring, dynamic moves. And that's all good. You'll find your people. And then if you're married with 4 kids, or like us, bunch of kids, you've got a even bigger support structure. Like I think of Tirza, your oldest, who literally she's a valuable member of the team.
Very much so.
And that's not zero patronizing anything. She is. And how old's Tirza now? I forget.
She's 12.
She's 12. Yeah. And she is phenomenal. So there's kind of both ends of those spectrum. There's less dynamicness in terms of like, you're probably not going to sell Seasons Yield Farm, which is the name of your farm.
Yet to mention.
Yeah. But at this stage in life, so maybe a little less dynamicness there, but there's a lot more support. And then on the other end, you've got that room to be dangerous if you're single or just married and try something.
Love it. Thanks, buddy.
Yeah, man. It's weird to tell your story on a podcast.
Hanging on
I feel like I had some
word.
out-of-body experiences. I don't know what I was saying at certain times.
Right. Well, let's go listen.
Yeah. All right.